Thank you for joining the Fairfield Democrats podcast. I'm your host, Josh Kilroy. My guest today is Jean Lotus, and we're discussing screen time, television, other screens that soak up our attention and distract us and otherwise diminish us. Jean is a Colorado based journalist. She is focused on covering the hemp industry, hemp building in particular. We discussed that in the last conversation. She's been a longtime investigative journalist in Chicago and Cook County prior to that. And for our purposes, in the 90s, Jean published a zine called White Dot, dedicated to anti-television activism. And she and her co-author and college friend David Burke published this book, Get a Life, in 1997. The full title is Get a Life, The Little Red Book of the White Dot Anti-Television Movement. Like I said, published in 1997 by Bloomsbury Press. And the other thing to mention is that Jean is a rock star. As the principal songwriter and guitarist for the band Barbie Army, and their classic "Don't Wait," which was recently, or in recent years, rediscovered on YouTube. And hopefully we can talk a little bit about that. But I do want to talk about the anti-television stuff. So we've known each other since college. And in the 90s, when you started talking about this, I must say it blew my mind. As somebody who had a very typical American childhood, when you started saying, oh, television is not good for us, it was like you were talking from outer space. And I could not process that at the time. But how did you get into how did you come to reject that most American of institutions, the television?
Well, the truth is that my parents didn't really have a TV when I was little. My dad was a philosophy professor here at Colorado State University, but he had been a Dominican monk beforehand. And in fact, he was kind of in the Dominicans when kind of really took off in the. So they didn't have one when I was real little, but I didn't remember that at all. Uh, so growing up, blah, 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 I always, Josh, you and I went to University of Chicago together, and there was always an issue with, you'd be in a student apartment, and then like the living room was totally taken over by the TV, right? And so you like there was no space that didn't have it, and it was a little bit oppressive. I was really excited by the zine movement, and that came from being in the rock and roll world and the punk rock world. And you guys probably remember the zine Maximum Rock and Roll. Well, there were also these other zines. There was this one called Fact Sheet 5, which was just a list of reviews of other zines. Yeah, so that was really cool because you could read like, oh my God, here's a zine about like someone who goes to amusement parks and just rates all of the rides. Or here's a zine, and a lot of zines became books, and that's what happened with us. Right? There was one book called "Sabotage in the American Workplace" that was a zine where this guy had basically written about like all these people who were doing like little tiny acts of sabotage that and what happened, like putting an extra zero. One guy worked for the Pentagon, and there was a tank, some kind of storage tank, and he just would add an extra zero on the size, like the dimensions of these tanks and stuff. So anyway, it was a great form of it was a great form of writing. And the other thing, it was kind of like the internet before the internet, right? It was internet. So it was like websites that you could look into people's lives, and people were being so creative. And so I decided, well, let's make a zine that's like a lifestyle magazine for people that don't watch TV. And so
How did you how did you find did you find other people who shared
Yeah,
your
because there had been this woman that had an anti-television club or something, like in the 70s, in the Pacific Northwest, of course. And she had like a little card that you could get. Like, I'm a card carrying member of the Anti TV
all
Society.
right.
So I love that, you know. But the other thing about zines was like they came in the mail every couple months. Like you subscribe to it and then like a new one would come and it was like, wow, this is really, but it wasn't like a magazine because having worked at various, even the Chicago Tribune, I know that like a lot of magazine products, a lot of print products are based on the advertising, right? It's even called a news hole. The news fits in the hole where the ads don't fit. And the whole thing only works because people are selling ads all day long. And you'll see that like the newsroom has 5 people and the ad department has like 50 people. So that is the generate. So the thing about zines was that basically with the the cheap Xerox ability, you didn't need to get anything printed at a printer anymore, or even you could use a computer printer to make them. So you could suddenly, like, anybody could make a little magazine, and it wasn't driven by advertising sales. So it was very refreshing at the time. Um, I started doing this, and then at the for Gannett as a newspaper reporter, and of course, I there's always a fight between news journalists and between print journalists and media and uh, TV journalists, right?
Right,
And
right.
we would just say, they don't really do any investigating. They don't blah 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 blah, and they steal all our ideas, and then they just repeat what we just wrote, and they get paid way more. What's wrong with all this? We work so much harder. So I started to like sort of put out press releases about how like there's a whole group of people that don't watch TV, and they have this, and oh, we have to talk about why it's called White Dot, right, Josh?
Sure. I
Right. So people our age, when you turned off a television in the 60s and 70s, the early 70s, I guess, the screen would like zero down. It would go black except for one tiny little white dot, which even looked like it was sort of in a three. It looked like it was thing there. It just was how tube televisions worked. So it would go down to this tiny white dot, and then that white dot would kind of sit there for a while, and it looked like it kind of led into the. I mean, did you get that feeling? As you could almost say like maybe that you can get in there, like maybe there's a world behind that. So yeah, so that's why we called it white dot. Was the last thing you see when you turn the television off, and then So anyway, the point is that I did some sort of press releases about it and blah blah blah, and then it started being written about it. It was in USA Today and the Tribune. So then the BBC starts calling, and all these British newspapers started calling because I don't know if you know this, but the way the American TV model works and the way the British TV model works are very different. The British TV people pay a license fee for their programming. So actually, they have trucks that go around looking for white daughters or people who aren't paying their license, and you have to prove that you don't own the television because everybody pays a tax to pay for the BBC, right? They now have commercial television and they have cable like we do, and blah blah blah. But here in the States, of course, all of the TV is paid for by the ads, so the commercials are the real thing, and the show is the Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom is the colorful pictures and sounds that they put on to keep you watching the
right,
commercials, right?
exactly. Right.
So at the same time, Amusing Ourselves to Death came out, which was also an anti-TV book that mainly looked about that was mainly what was the author's name?
Neil Postman.
Neil Postman, right? That was mainly about sort of the life things that are disrupted by television and you can say this has happened even more with the sort of screen life of people being sucked in, and then the friction that they don't want to go outside anymore because life's great when you're just staring, although it is also mentally, a cause of mental health problems. But you don't have to deal with anything, and there's a magical world. It's a dream world, right? That you can have access to at all times. And then you don't have to deal with your real situation, which might mean, oh God, there's a leak in the ceiling here, and oh, I owe all this money, and blah, blah, blah. So,
But one thing I've noticed, because I've read both books recently, yours and Neil's, and your critique had the advantage of coming out a few years later. It's like Neil, like he really hated TV news. Like he was
yes,
willing to, like the A Team, that's fine. It's mindless entertainment. But news, you can't think about real issues because everything is designed to sell ads. But like he did, he wrote before Chick Set Me High wrote Flow, and sort of, and gaming sort of took off. So like he didn't have access to that sort of critique, which you did, by the time you were writing your zine. So, in some sense, what I noticed was that your critique was even more comprehensive. And but
yes.
like,
And at the time, we had something called Channel One, which was we've got to get a television in every single. So the idea of the captive audience became, kind of ran wild. So Channel One was a supposedly educational thing. So they would basically give the school a bunch of televisions and then say, you have to put this in every classroom, and then you have to turn it, and we're going to bombard your kids with commercials and then a little bit of programming.
right,
And then we can tell our advertisers, like, millions of children see your show. The same thing happened with airports, if you recall. Uh, they suddenly started to have TVs in airports, and it was just, there was, and doctors' offices, like the doctor's office station, where it would just do all these ads for horrible drugs, and then some light content that you couldn't turn off. And then our friend Mitch Altman came up with this amazing invention called the TV Be Gone. I actually have you can make them. This is a kit. You can make it with a soldering iron. This is a TV Be Gone. So it's a universal control that was shaped like a key fob. You could basically turn off any TV. So there was a great moment when some people went to the CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, with TV Be Gone. Some people from Gizmodo, and they were turning. So that was fabulous. Definitely a fight between humans and screens going on, but we lost. The humans lost. And then the other thing is that we raised, four of our five kids without a TV. We never had a TV, but by the time our youngest was in kindergarten, YouTube had come along, and good Lord, I mean, and early YouTube had its charms, right? But it definitely was not the algorithm driven hellhole that it is now. So, some of the cool things that Neil Postman came to Chicago, and he and I went to the Billy Goat. And, we talked a lot about stuff. And he basically said, one of the things he was talking about was like these doctors that were telling him when he was writing his book that kids just had less of a grip on gravity. He said, kids, when they're little, they're going to jump off the garage or something, but they don't jump off a 2-story building. But sometimes kids do that now, or at least he had encountered doctors who said that, because they just did not have a grip on on gravity. So if you think about that, it's it's quite, we're still a we have not really evolved to be able to deal with all of the images and things that are pushed at us through screens.
right. Gene, I know you have your copy of the book there. I was wondering if you would read the one-page introduction, because I read it again last night, and I was struck by how current it all seems.
My co-author, Dave Burke, he's a computer programmer, but he also is, his dream would be to be a stand-up comic. Stand-up comic, not a TV stand-up comic. So
Right,
he's a
right,
funny guy. And when we wrote this book, it was meant to be a parody of a self-help book. So it's
right.
got like the 7 habits of highly televised people and okay, so I'm going to read this. Introduction. The human species will offer itself for voluntary extinction within 100 years. Today, artificial intelligence allows computers to look after old people in television sets to guess what programs we'd like to watch. Tomorrow, it will enable us to shed our physical bodies. The world's leading AI expert, Marvin Minsky, believes we will merge our intellects with powerful computers, themselves designed by other computers, sometime in the next century. Death shall be overcome, and we will be software, traveling over the globe at the speed of light. A group of scientists has formed something called the Extropian Institute, looking forward to this next stage of evolution. They've adopted the motto, quote, intelligence, information, energy, vitality, diversity, and capacity for improvement. They're really happy about this. They can't wait. They think the end of biological human beings is a great idea. White Dot wrote this book because we don't.
Right. That is a powerful that, like I said, is current today. I mean,
It is.
You substitute Ray Kurzweil for Marvin Minsky and the singularity that people are waiting for. Yes, exactly. It's perverse. I did want to sort of just drill down a little more. You mentioned you're the mother of five, and you got through the first four without television.
I never owned a television.
Right.
Never owned one, but did the computer at the time. This is 2000, right? And so the computer becomes more and more sort of in a, the phone has not really yet become the portable television that you carry with you at all times. So the computer became more and more, YouTube, blah, blah, blah. And of course, then you're trying to, everybody's fighting over the computer because now they have to use it for their, for their homework, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, I will say that, video has always been a great persuader. That's why it's used for advertisements. So well, and video is still being used with TikTok and I remember the youngest kid sitting on my lap, and I don't know if you remember the weird YouTube videos that people started to make about Barack Obama in 2008.
Oh,
And then people making videos about John McCain, like it's raining McCain, and and they
right.
were all like very, very amateur, but just really charming.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that the Obama campaign actually ran with that and ran all these, children's videos talking about Barack Obama and blah, blah, blah. And, they really captured that moment. And I do think I heard Ezra Klein talking about, who the next president of the United States will be. And he said that person's going to have to be just a great communicator. And I think um, that video is really a great way to communicate. It's a great way to tell, read cues, social cues, and, maybe they say that the Kennedy Nixon debate was, the first one televised. And of course, Nixon won it to people who listened on the radio, and Kennedy won it to people who watched on TV. So, but yeah, anyway, 5 kids. Yeah. Well, we did a lot of things. Like we had a lot of backyard swing set. We lived right down the street from a playground. We deliberately built our, where we lived in a place that the kids would have physical things to do outside, blah, blah, blah. And it turns out whenever you have a big family that all the kids in the neighborhood end up at your house.
Right.
So we didn't, and you grew up in a big family too, right? You had
Yes,
like
I did.
5?
Yep. Right.
Yeah, so I did not. I have 3, we're 3 siblings, but you have like 6, 5?
I'm
How
the
many?
oldest of 6.
6, yeah. So you remember, like a lot of people come in and out of blah 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 bugs, and
Right.
and that was really fun. And you didn't really need a TV for that.
Right.
Here's a great story. This is so sweet. So we did a lot of books on tape, especially mom needs to make dinner or whatever. So we would put on these, and there were these recordings of children's classics like Robin Hood, the Iliad, uh, of course, the Harry Potter books on tape. I don't know if you've ever heard those. They're magnificent. But here we are, we were Robin Hood in the car or whatever. And my daughter, who was 4 years old, said, "Mom, what's a chilling?" And I said, "A what?" And she said, "A chilling. Robin Hood has 30 of them on his head, and Little John has 10. So that's what you get when you raise kids listening to books on tape instead of watching TV. And that was like one of the cutest things I ever heard in my life.
Right. Right. But with the rise of the phone and social media, and it's you can see the mental entropy that takes hold, and you talked about how TV sort of distorted the reality field for young children. We see that, I think, to a much greater extent now, and we're also the explosion of anxiety disorders, and um, um, yeah, how do you make sense? Like, I mean, just like when you had TV, at least it was an adversary that took up physical space, and
Right,
it was
exactly. So it was like a giant thing in your living room, and it literally did. Like Americans got rid of their pianos and screw this piano, It's, what do we need a piano? That's what living rooms had in the very middle. Here, I have a picture.
right,
This family here, this is my grandfather sitting on the lap here.
right.
But, the piano was the giant thing in the middle of their living room, right?
But
And so you get rid of the piano, and then then it's like, why are you practicing the piano? Because you're supposed to. There was no sort of entertainment
right,
value to it. There was no sort of community value to it.
right,
It was just to get a music scholarship or get into
right,
college or whatever, you know. But anyway, so yeah, so literally. But if you think about what is, of course, we wrote a lot about CCTV in the movie too, and the whole idea of everything you do is being watched, and that was more so in Britain in 1997 than it is. But now, of course, you can see everyone has a Ring camera. Every single thing you can assume is being videotaped. And then again, in some ways, it's really good that people have phones because citizen videotaping of ICE has really made a huge difference, I think, in how the U.S. is choking this down or not choking it down when people are being kidnapped off the streets. And seeing other people being brave in front of ICE and yelling at them and basically making their life harder is really important. I think it shows that people, and in Chicago, of course, um, I have a lot of relatives who were Chicago police officers, many generations of Chicago police officers, and there were always shootings in Chicago. There were always police shootings, but there weren't people taking pictures of them. And that is way more a video has brought that to light and brought rogue actors to justice in some cases.
but it's extracted at extreme cost, right?
It has.
How long did you hold out?
We had flip phones through like 2015, 2016, but I think everybody did. I mean, nobody really had smartphones, and a lot of that stuff wasn't real. There wasn't video on phones for many,
Right, right.
that's really been a
Last
thing in
10
the
or
past
12 years.
5 years or so.
Yeah. It's getting worse all the time. So, but flip phones are coming back because people.
They are. And my
They,
youngest actually had a flip phone for a while, but he couldn't, like, there were things he couldn't do on it. Like, he's taking courses for electrician, and they were supposed to be doing stuff on their phones, and you can't do it without a smartphone,
it's the apps, right? You need to be
Yeah.
able to run the apps. Um, are you? I mean, you're not a specific lifestyle, but an active lifestyle where people are engaged with the world and doing things and having thoughts. I mean, what do we how to maintain stuff like that when you've got the world's greatest library of movies in
Exactly.
your pocket?
Um, um, well, I'm going back to this Ezra Klein interview I saw, and the interviewer said, "Well, gosh, you really always bring your game, and you're always at the top. And like, how do you do that?" And he said, "Well, I read a lot of things on paper."
Right, right.
And we all know that if you read a book, it's different, right?
Yes,
We all know
absolutely.
that.
Yep.
You cannot get the same thing reading a screen, even if you're on a Kindle. I guess you can sort of mimic it, but paper really makes a huge difference.
It
And the
does.
book technology is pretty amazing when you think about it. You can take it to the beach, it doesn't need to be plugged. It lasts for 50 years. So I do think that books are, they're not going to go away. And I think that and I also think in my own experience, looking, if I read for like 3 hours, say a long airplane ride or something, my brain feels different. I really do feel like something weird has taken place. And it's like a ka-chunk, like the old 8-track tapes. It suddenly like ka-chunks into a different mindset. And I used to be addicted to that mindset. And of course, now, I'm on the computer all day because I'm writing and doing some, project management, freelance, all the freelance stuff that one does. So you're suddenly, less able. But I think one of the things that we used to do is we used to go on walks in the evening, which is not a big deal, in the suburbs of Chicago in Oak Park. But the main thing is everybody else is watching TV, and you walk by every window. There's a big blue, screen there, and it's like the rest of the world is out here. It is fabulous. Look at these trees. Listen to those cicadas.
Right,
Look at these. There is so much out there that is not behind a screen.
right. My fear is that it's going to become that screen-free living will become a luxury good that only
Yes.
the really wealthy can afford to be off a phone because work, is being tracked. Some other,
Oh my
you know.
gosh, yeah. When you think about,
So
the Amazon drivers who have to pee in a bottle because their every move is being tracked with the GPS, they can't stop, they can't. Yeah, and of course, I can tell you that, the Chicago or the Stingray, have you heard of the Stingray technology? Which basically allows police officers to kind of track you with their phone, by your phone. Yeah, that's a thing that some of the suburban police officers, the police departments were experimenting with, just as, to help them with their investigations and all.
right, right.
But I actually had it happen to me. I was doing an investigative piece about Morton College in Berwyn or Cicero, and um, um, anyway, there people really do not have privacy with their phones, and they are trackable. And
Right.
of course, now you can the phone can lead the lethal drone right to your apartment.
Right. Right. Right.
So I do think, yeah, I agree that it will become like the top of luxury to be completely phone free, and like not have any electronics in your house. The thing is, some of the funny stuff that happened when we were writing this book, like people would say to us, we get all these radio interviews, and they're like, what about people who are disabled that can't go outside? Don't they deserve to have TV? And it's like, look, but you're not disabled and you can go outside. Remember in Chicago, they used to have this show called Mass for Shut-ins. Are we all shut-ins? It's like this TV exists so that some people can watch Mass for Shut-ins. I don't think so. I think it's
Right.
because they're selling ads and making a ton of money because you're sitting there. And then the other thing was, of course, like news TV weather, which is always like, don't go outside, whatever you do. Oh my God, you're gonna get so hot, or maybe you might get wet, or it's snowing. It's like the wind chill is negative 200 degrees, and you really shouldn't. It's dangerous out there.
So on a switch, because one thing that happened on YouTube was that your music was rediscovered. Um, tell us, tell us how that happened.
Again, the pandemic.
Right.
My gosh. So yeah, we had an all-girl band called Barbie Army in Chicago for about 6 years, starting in the mid '80s. We were kind of right after the first Chicago wave, which I would say would be Naked Raygun and Articles of Faith and the Effigies and these bands, the Wax Trax band. So then we kind of came along, and I had been kind of living in London on a work visa, and I came back and I was like, I have to be in a band. I have to do it. And I was still in school. But luckily, it actually focuses the mind. If you're trying to finish your work, you actually get it done because you have band practice or whatever you're doing. So
Right.
anyway, so we recorded, and the thing with an all-girl band is the Runaways found this out. A lot of bands have found this out. It's very unstable. So every time we recorded, somebody would quit, and then we would be like, oh, we got to find another bass player. Oh no.
Right.
So it was basically me and the drummer till the end when she quit. So there was a lot of personnel changes, blah blah blah. But there's a guy named Thirsty Craig on YouTube who's a great Chicago '80s band guy, and he had just tons and tons of cassettes of all these bands, and we made multiple cassettes. We recorded many times because people kept quitting, right? And then it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. So Thirsty Craig just put a bunch of songs up, a bunch of all the songs from all of our cohorts in that scene. And it was really before, I'll tell you, Josh, I was actually working at a record company, and there was something called Sound Scan, which was basically the use of barcodes to record record sales at the time. And beforehand, when somebody was like number one with a bullet in Billboard, it was based on the number of advanced records that were sold to distributors. So you could have a number one record without ever selling a single record.
Right.
But when SoundScan came out, they figured out two things. First of all these people had bought the Nirvana record. And second of all these people had bought, I think it was Garth Brooks. The Garth Brooks really said, who are these bands and where can we find them? Well, by then Barbie Army was broken up, but or was breaking up. We were but so at that point, Smashing Pumpkins came in. A lot of record companies came to Chicago. Veruca Salt, Liz Phair, fantastic Chicago scene developed, based on what people actually, and then the grunge thing happened because it was based on actual record sales, and record companies took that. And now, of course, that's another thing to talk about with digitizing music and how it's just horrific for the artists and they don't make any money at all. But I will say, to end the point with the video, so we started to get a lot of hits on this video, and now it has like more than 100,000 plays on it. And this guy from Germany reached out and said, "Oh, I'd like to make a record of you. Have you ever made a record?" And I said, "We just have a lot of cassettes." And he said, "Oh, we'd like to make a record." And I said, "Well, our material was somewhat uneven, and sometimes it was good and sometimes it was not so good. So maybe we can pick out the best songs, okay?" And he said, "Oh no, I think it needs to be a retrospective of your entire work, all the originals." And I said, "Well, it's kind of longer than a whole EP and a whole LP. LPs are 40 minutes usually." He said, "Then we have to have a bonus 6-inch or 4-inch or whatever it is." So anyway, I have it right here. I just happen to have a copy of the record right here. So this is it. Phyllis's Musical Inn, and the songs, and then here's the bonus EP that came in. And so he made this thing like it's so flippin' luxurious. And of course, I'm working with him, and it's like 2021. The pandemic is raging, and I finally went to Germany. It turns out I have several of our kids are in Germany for school. I went to Germany to meet him and pick up some records, and I just wanted to shake him and say, "You're making a terrible mistake." But he sold out. He sold out of them. So, and that's what he does. He makes like 300, 500 records, and then he sells them out, and then he moves on to the next thing. So he's, so anyway, it was exciting. It was an exciting thing. And again, because of the pandemic, everyone's sitting around listening to music. He kind of found us that way, I guess. The Chicago scene.
There are several videos of "Don't Wait," and I loosely totaled them up, and I think they surpassed 2,000. So,
oh, really?
Yeah. So the word has gotten out.
Yes, it's fun.
And then to celebrate the release of the record, you performed again at Phyllis's.
We did perform it for sure.
Well, on that note, Gina, again, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me here today.
Oh, gosh.
It's been a pleasure. And it's funny, your work from the 90s continues to be trailblazing. So, unfortunately, there aren't any extant copies of your book out, right? They're
only used copies. So, yeah, they changed the way they did inventory in Great Britain for tax reasons. So they basically they used to be able to write them off, but they destroyed all the copies. So they're floating around, and it is funny. It's got a lot of funny parts in it. Dave is the funny one. Right. And it's got good comics.
Yep.
If you see it for $10 somewhere at a thrift store,
right,
buy it, because you'll get a laugh.
Right. So, yes, Get a Life or the Barbie Army Retrospective. All right. Well, thanks again, and thanks for joining, everyone. Have a great day.
Oh, thanks so much.
Bye.
We'll see you later, Josh.